Good morning, good evening, and good day. Thank you so much for watching Attack Power Gaming. Today, we're going into our next part of our How to Get Good at Steel Division 2 tutorial series with Tank Micro. If you enjoyed this content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing for more Steel Division 2 content. Please, it really helps the channel a lot. Let's dive right in. So the first thing we're going to hit up here with Tank Micro is making sure that you're aware of what kind of ammunition your tank is using. Now, this doesn't come up with a lot of tanks, but it's really important for the ones it does come up with. For Panzer IIIs, for example, which are a relatively common unit and a very good one. If you have Panzer IIIs in your division, you should be using them. They have APCR shells as well as AP shells. Now, the difference here, and I get this question a lot, what is the difference and what is the point? So, AP shells and APCR shells are both armor-piercing weapons, so they're designed for enemy vehicles and tanks. And the main difference here, if we look at these two going back and forth, we can see that the APCR have a much higher penetration value, okay, and a much shorter range, right? So 1,000 meters versus 1,500 meters, but only 100 meters of pen on the AP versus 150 millimeters of pen. The other really big important difference is this right here, the damage. An APCR shell is going to do significantly less damage, usually about half the amount of damage that an AP shell will do. Now, that's not a definite thing. It could be more or less than half, but just in this case, it would be half. And there's often a slightly different accuracy rating as well. But the main one we're going to worry about is this damage right here. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is, for me, I generally always turn off APCR shells until I'm very specifically going to use them on something that I cannot pierce with usual AP shells. The reason being, it's going to take me 4 penetrations to actually kill an enemy tank with this, because I have mentioned this in other videos. If you haven't watched the How to Not Suck with Tanks video, go watch that. But tanks, medium tanks have 10 health. Heavy tanks have 10 health. Nowhere in the game does it say this, but it is just a fact. Medium and light heavy tanks have 10 health. Light tanks, for the most part, have some amount less health. Armor cars have less health than that. But for the most part, medium and heavy tanks have 10 health. So if you do the math, 3 hits is only 9 damage. It's not going to kill a medium tank unless the tank had been damaged in some other way that had decreased its health. There's no way to see this damage. There's no way to see this health or anything. When you zoom into your tank, you can kind of see how much damage is actually like present visually on it. But other than that, that's it. That's the only way to know. So you want to be using AP shells because of their higher damage, because it's only going to generally take 2 hits to kill an opponent with AP shells over APCR shells. Now, the other bonus of the APCR shells is they generally do more critical hits, as in tracks broken, transmission broken, armor cracks, ammo explosion, these kind of things. So APCR shells do have a chance of like immediately blowing up a tank, but it's a very low chance, and it's definitely not worth the trade-off of just being able to kill the tank in 2 hits. So for me, generally, when I have APCR shells, I turn them off unless I know I'm sending the unit against something specific. So say this guy was going after a Tiger, which he could with APCR shells. I'd have to get much closer though, so be aware. The other difference I did forget to mention is that APCR shells, their penetration drops off faster. This number is at point blank range, so at like 100 meters, that is the penetration value. Okay, as it gets further, the penetration value drops. It drops much more quickly for APCR than it does for normal AP shells. So say at maximum range, these will still penetrate like 80 millimeters consistently. On the other hand, at say 1,000 meter range, at the maximum range, these will only penetrate 100 now, so they drop a lot more significantly. So just keep all of those things in mind. I always suggest to just turn off the APCR shells if you can remember to micro. Definitely do it on your like PaK 40s and stuff. You do not need to be firing APCR out of those guns most of the time. A PaK 40 will pierce basically everything on its own. So just be aware. Make sure to check if your tank has APCR shells. The next thing I want to talk about with Tank Micro is definitely positioning. So positioning your tanks is extremely important. You have to be highly aware of their line of sights and their ranges. So the Panzer III, for example, has a range of 1,500 meters on its normal AP shells. So that's what we're going off. Like I said, I turned off the APCR shells you can see here. To turn them off, you just click on them, by the way. Don't miss. If you click on the actual gun, it'll turn the entire gun off. So AP shells, 1,500 meter range. All right, so this is what I'm working with. If I had positioned this guy right here, instead. When this tank came down the road, this Stug 42 has a 1750 meter range on its cannon, which means that it would be able to easily shoot me at a distance that I could not fire back, and I would probably die before ever firing a shot. So it's very important that I position my Panzer here instead, where the line of sight is actually cut off on this road, because again, I'm assuming he's going to come driving down this road. So when I set this up, I'm setting it up so at about 1500 meters there, back up a little so we can see a little better. At about 1500 meters there, that is when, on the road, that is when I will actually be able to see enemies. This way, then, the first time he sees me, I will actually already be in range and be able to fire and negate that advantage of the 250 meter range. This is really important that you pay attention to this, because your tanks will, especially if you're playing as the allies who generally have a shorter range on their tanks than the Axis, you have to be ready to find ways to make up for that range difference. It's not that the allied armor is worse because it has shorter range. You just have to be more prepared to work around line of sights and things to get up close where they need to be. Normally, once they get into those ranges, they will pretty easily dominate the Axis armor because of their lower lower armor values. They will win at closer ranges. So you just have to figure out how to work with those shorter range tanks when you have them, when you're playing against tanks that have a longer range. So be highly aware of the positioning of your tanks based on the ranges that you're fighting in. So talking about positioning again, here's a perfect example of placing a tank in a good covered position, watching down the road. So now when this tank comes into range to kill him, this Stug 42 is going to have that half-second advantage to fire first, which is really important because essentially what you're doing is you're racing, in this case the cluster bomber kill, but you are racing to get 2 hits. Whichever tank can score 2 hits first wins, essentially. 2 penetrations, I should say more specifically. So that's why going 2 tanks versus 1 is so advantageous, is because you're going to be able to land those 2 hits first with the first burst of both of the weapons. So doing that, having 2 tanks, basically makes you kill the opponent in 1 shot from each tank and allows you to win most engagements easily compared to having 1-on-1 or at worst 1 versus 2 or more. So another thing that's really important for Tank Micro is to make sure that you have something to spot for your tanks. The average tank, non-recon version tank, has very low optics. This means that the tank can essentially not spot for itself until the infantry are right next to it. So this is really important to be aware of. Your tanks are not going to spot things on their own. Recon tanks, yeah, they definitely might. But for the most part, just a tank out here in the open is not going to see. So the reason he can see me is because he has these infantry here, which are allowing, you know, they have a higher optics here, good optics, so they can actually see my tank over here. I, on the other hand, have nothing to spot for them. So this Stug here is taking pot shots at this Panzer IV without it even responding. Even after the Stug is fired, it's still not responding because it just can't see it. And also, too, there seems to be a weird thing with the line of sight here possibly as well, where my guy apparently has no line of sight on him, and he has line of sight on me, even though it's questionable to say if he's on the line or not. So be aware of these things too. Sometimes weird line of sight things happen, but this is most likely because he has something spotting for him, and I, on the other hand, do not. Big thing to do with tanks is make sure you use the reverse option. So I discovered I was getting a shot by something in this location, could not see it. So instead of just clicking back to make him move, I'm making sure to hit G and doing the reverse move instead to make sure that he backs straight up, keeping his front armor facing towards whatever is shooting at him, and also assuring that he's going to back up as quickly as possible. He's just going to go straight back. He's not going to do anything stupid and turn. I know you might assume, oh, if I just click back, he'll automatically go backwards because that's the most logical thing to do. I can promise you the AI does not always choose the most logical thing to do. Sometimes it'll do it right. Most of the time it will not. You're going to want to use that reverse button, especially with tanks, a lot. Use it, get used to using it. That's how you save your tanks. That's how you keep them facing the right way, because otherwise they're going to turn, they're going to show this side armor over here, this back armor, and they're going to die. Also, I want to show you here, this is what damage on the tank looks like. So remember, you can't, there's no health bar to see the health, but you can see damage on the tank. You can see it has all kinds of like bullet holes and stuff. Every tank just has its own little graphic animation of what it looks like when it gets damaged. It's the same, but we can see over here with this Panzer III, see how it's all fresh looking and nice. You know that the damage on this is low to none. This, on the other hand, is all scarred up and hurt, so you know that that damage has been done to it. You don't know exactly how much, but at least a fair amount of damage has happened to this tank. So another really important thing to understand about tanks in this game is that they absolutely can die from HE damage. So right here, for example, this Stug just died to this Grill. This Grill has no AP weapons whatsoever. It simply died from taking too much damage from at whatever source. It can be a combination of HE and AP damage. But it's really important to understand that HE weapons like bombers, mortars, artillery, support weapons with only high explosive ammunition, these things are perfectly capable of killing tanks. Just because the tank is armored doesn't mean it doesn't take damage from HE sources. Okay, now it never takes damage from small arms fire from rifles and snipers and things, but it absolutely can die from any combination of other things. Okay, so in that case, my 88 hit it once, and then the Grill shot it once. It had shot it once before, and the combination of that damage pushed it over its 10 health limit, which, as we know, doesn't exist in any written form, but it's there. Okay, so it is there, and due to surpassing that health bar, it died. So just be aware of that. If there's a heavy tank you can't kill, it still only has 10 health. Drop some bombs on it, hit it with some artillery, it will die eventually. I mean, unless the opponent brings up a supply truck to resupply it, it will die. So just be aware of that. Really important, and a key way for divisions without strong AP to kill some of the heavy armor that might be plaguing it. The next thing to cover with our microing our armor is how to micro heavy armor specifically. In this case, a Panther. Panthers, Tigers, IS-2s, these are examples of your heavy tanks. There are plenty of others. The British have, like, Churchills, I guess, could be considered, although it's more that they're just heavily armored, not necessarily heavily gunned. King Tigers, Elephants, ISU 152s. I mean, some people might consider T-34-85 heavy armor. I don't personally. It's a heavier medium tank, but definitely not heavy armor. So the way to use these sort of tanks, for the most part, is to position them in a place where they have great line of sight on a large area in front of them, where they can take full advantage of their maximum range. So usually these tanks have 2,000 meter range, which outranges basically all the medium tanks and all of the other kinds of tanks you will see in the game. And medium tanks are the main thing you'll see. Stug 3s, Panzer 4s, T-34s, Shermans, so on and so forth. So these guys can outrange them, and that's where they get the advantage. Yes, they have a much higher penetration value. 185 millimeters is way higher than medium and light tanks. But it's that 2,000 meter range that really can set these guys apart. So the best way to use them is to set them up in a place where they can very easily cover an open area, where infantry and AT cannot easily sneak up on it, right? And then to make sure to position some sort of recon so that you can clearly see things. Because remember, their optics are terrible, so they're not going to be able to see things from far away without assistance from another unit. And then another thing you'll probably need is AA of some sort, because, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing your opponent's going to do when they can't deal with it is start sending planes to bomb it to death. So having AA to protect it is a really useful way to keep that thing alive. So heavy tanks are more for area denial than anything else. Setting them up in a really good position, for example, up here with my Grill, basically denies this entire area from your opponent. So making sure to be aware of how to use that heavy armor. It's 100% not for driving into towns. That is absolutely not what you do at heavy armor, okay? It's not for driving into forests. You need to take advantage of the longer ranges that it gets with its gun to use it effectively. So we can see here, this is another example of positioning for your heavy tanks. I'm putting my Panther up on this hill where it has great lines of sight, and it can take advantage of its extremely long range comparatively to other tanks to eliminate targets without ever actually being in danger. This way I can take full advantage of A, the gun, and also the armor. So remember, the farther away a tank is from its target, the lower the penetration value will be on its gun, right? The further it is, the more the drop off on that penetration, which means that even though this Stug has 135 millimeters of pen, that's only when it's right up next to the target. When it is at maximum firing range of 1750 or 1500, it's much lower than that. It's probably closer to 120, 115 in terms of its actual penetration, which means it really can't penetrate the 130 millimeters of armor that the Panther has. So we can see here in this situation, my Panther is going to be able to very easily handle all three of these Stugs. Now I'm getting a little bit of help from my Grill here doing that HE damage, but we can see here just one by one. And each time it's a penetration. Now, that's not assured, of course, but the fact of the matter is, and a bounce. So the fact of the matter is, they just can't penetrate this tank at that range. And at 185 millimeters, even at maximum range, even if this is still only penning about 140 instead, I mean, that Stug only has 90 millimeters of armor. It's an easy kill. And then I add some Panzer IVs onto here, and it just has no chance. And you can see now even, I'm using this to hit this pack from long range. He's just out of range. Now, of course, my Panzer IV is in range as well, and I use this plane. But the fact of the matter is that pack has a low chance of penetrating my Panther at that range. It can't use APCR that far, and its normal AP shells will have their range drop off, their penetration drop off because of the range, and the Panther is essentially invincible up on this hill. You can see it's very easily handling all of these Stug 3s without any trouble whatsoever. So this is the way you got to use your heavy armor. This is how you use it successfully, and this is how it really causes headaches for your opponents, and you start to see why heavy tanks can be really good. If you use them incorrectly, they're a massive waste of points. You're just completely throwing points into the wind by sending these guys into close range. This is how you use them effectively. So another example of how to assault an enemy tank here, or use your tanks effectively in terms of line of sight. So I'm on this hill, so these two Panzers can't see over the hill. Now I have the advantage either way because it's 2 versus 1, right? And my guys are 2-star, so I mean they have a lot of advantages. But the truth is they've been bombed, so they're likely going to die in only one hit. If I zoom in here, we can see damage all over these tanks, which means they'll only probably take one hit, which means the Stug 3 might actually have a chance of killing these tanks. So it's really important that I take the first shot in this battle. Now, before I crest this hill, I need to make sure my tanks are lined up so they will crest over the top of this hill at the exact same time. I do not want them lined up with one further back and one further forward, because then they'll line up and get over the hill one at a time and give this Stug 3 the opportunity to reload and perhaps attack my tanks a second time and again successfully kill them. And I'm doing this especially because I know their health is low, so I have to be extra precautious while doing this to make sure that they succeed in this attack. So here we go, I'm moving this guy forward, and both of them at the same time. Attack moves up the hill, making sure they attack simultaneously and don't line up stupid. And of course one's still kind of crested first, but pretty close. There's 1 hit, 2 hits, dead, and you can see one of my guys did die from that attack. So, you know, that is why I was taking those extra precautions there. And unfortunately, it's going to die now to his double Stug. Oh, and they actually missed, so I end up getting to fall back. Not going to get out of range in time, though, which is unfortunate. Oh, look at that. He missed. Sometimes you get lucky. So that's how to successfully assault a tank that you know is there, and you need to get a better line of sight. That's how you do it. Make sure you line up your tanks correctly so they approach at the same time. And you can see him using his artillery to bomb my Panther over here. This is a great plan. Okay, I'm currently not watching it, so basically it's just taking damage. Right, we can see it's got a lot of damage on it right now. And especially things like 150 millimeter shells, these will eventually kill a tank. I mean, without a doubt. He'll probably kill it here soon. So this is a very viable strategy for taking out heavy tanks that you can't deal with otherwise. His division has essentially no other way of dealing with heavy tanks, especially because I already shot down his AT planes. So he's basically up the creek without a paddle. His best chance at this point is to simply bomb it till it dies. So I want to end here with a really common but micro-heavy, intense strategy with using tanks. So this is really common. You'll see a lot of high players do this, and it's really effective if done well. So what he's going to do here with his T-34, I'm going to turn to see a little bit better. What he's going to do here with his T-34 is he's going to hop in and out of cover and line of sight of my tanks in order to give his tanks time to fire, retreat, reload, and then fire again to minimize the amount of time I have to shoot back at him. This is most effective when the opponent doesn't have much recon. So here I don't really have eyes other than these tanks. So the tanks are really only going to see his tank when he pops out of cover. They won't spot him while he's still in this light cover, which gives him the opportunity to continuously fire and reload. So you can see he's hopped out here. This guy happened to lose sight as well at the same time, and now he's driving back out to see them, and of course they can't see them because again they have no sight. And he's going to pop back out here. He's going to get the first shot. You can see him firing already and backing back up immediately using that reverse button to then basically win this fight. Pops back out again. And there's really not much for my tank to do other than to eventually die without really ever firing a shot at his tank. This is a very micro heavy strategy. You have to be really paying attention to do this because, of course, if you leave your guy out or leave him back, he's not going to do anything or he might die. So you have to be ready to be on the mouse to do that. But it can be extremely effective against enemy armor if you can find a good place to do it. Like this here often works in towns, hopping in and out of buildings. So just be aware, a very effective armored strategy if you can pull it off. If you enjoyed this content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic day.